What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected directors sits down for what should be a routine interview, only to walk straight into an on-air ambush that exposes the toxic underbelly of daytime television? Ron Howard, the legendary filmmaker behind classics like Apollo 13, A Beautiful Mind, and Rush, believed he was appearing on The View to promote his latest project. Instead, he found himself locked in a tense verbal confrontation with Joy Behar, whose aggressive accusations and distorted logic tested even Howard's famously calm demeanor. What unfolded live on national television became one of the most uncomfortable talk show moments in recent memory, leaving viewers stunned as a beloved director's composure visibly began to crack. Before we get into it, don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments about so-called ambush interviews in today's media. Asterisk. Backstage at ABC Studios. The green room hummed with familiar pre-show energy. Ron Howard straightened his tie and reviewed the talking points prepared by his publicist. The interview was supposed to focus on his upcoming film, a heartfelt drama centered on small-town America that was already generating early Oscar buzz. After decades in the spotlight, from his childhood fame as Opie Taylor to directing some of Hollywood's biggest blockbusters, this appearance should have been effortless. When a production assistant announced it was time, Ron followed her through a maze of corridors lined with framed photos of A-list guests and iconic moments from The View's long history. The sound of applause grew louder as the hosts took their seats at the familiar semicircular table, with Whoopi Goldberg's unmistakable voice filling the studio as she introduced the segment. Asterisk. Our next guest needs no introduction, Whoopi declared, praising Howard's more than 50 years of entertainment contributions. As Ron stepped onto the set, the audience erupted. He smiled warmly, waved, shook hands with each host, and settled into his seat. Though the studio lights felt unusually intense, he brushed it off as nervous excitement for a project close to his heart. Whoopi welcomed him sincerely, reminiscing about his Andy Griffith show days, and Ron responded with genuine gratitude, reflecting on how fortunate he felt to grow up in front of America's eyes. The conversation began exactly as expected: friendly, respectful, and celebratory. Asterisk. Sarah N. leaned forward enthusiastically and asked about the themes of community and resilience in his new film. Ron's eyes lit up as he spoke passionately about unity in a divided world, recalling a time when neighbors looked out for one another, regardless of politics or background. It was a message of shared values and human connection until the tone abruptly shifted. Joy Behar interjected sharply, questioning Howard's nostalgia and challenging his portrayal of the past as anything resembling a golden era. She listed historical injustices, segregation, gender inequality, discrimination, and framed his comments as a romanticized defense of privilege. Asterisk. The atmosphere in the studio instantly chilled. Caught off guard, Ron chose his words carefully, acknowledging the flaws of the past while emphasizing the progress society has made. But Joy pressed harder, accusing him and people like him benefiting from systems others suffered under. The audience grew restless, sensing that this was no longer a conversation but a confrontation. From the sidelines, Howard's publicist watched in visible distress. Asterisk. Still composed, Ron clarified that he had been speaking purely about community spirit, not politics or power structures. Joy responded with a knowing smirk, dismissing the distinction altogether. According to her, everything was political, especially nostalgia voiced by someone with influence. Art, she argued, could not be separated from politics, and personal memories could not be detached from the suffering others experienced during the same era. As her words hung heavily in the air, viewers at home witnessed the moment an interview meant to celebrate storytelling turned into a public reckoning, one that left everyone watching deeply uncomfortable. Asterisk. Sunny host attempted to interject, sensing the interview was spiraling out of control. Joy, I think Ron is just trying to talk about his film, she began, but Joy snapped back sharply. her attention laser-focused on Howard. "No, let him answer. I want to know if Ron Howard thinks the civil rights movement was just people complaining about the good old days he's so fond of remembering." Ron's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Decades of media training had taught him to remain composed under pressure, but this was unlike anything he had faced before. The question wasn't merely unfair. It was deliberately inflammatory, designed to trap him regardless of his response. "Joy, with all due respect, you're putting words in my mouth that I never said. I've always supported civil rights, women's rights, and equality for all people. My films have consistently promoted themes of inclusion and understanding." Joy, clearly enjoying watching the acclaimed director, squirmed, countered. "Have they? Though? Or have they just been feel-good stories that make white audiences feel better about themselves without actually challenging anything?" The other hosts exchanged uneasy glances, clearly unsettled by her attack dog approach. Even Whoopi, known for her own pointed questions, seemed taken aback by Joy's relentless assault. Run took a deep breath, trying to steer the conversation back to his work. "If you look at my body of work, From a Beautiful Mind to 13 Lives, you'll see stories that celebrate human resilience and the power of working together to overcome challenges. These aren't partisan messages, they're human messages. Human messages," Joy repeated with obvious disdain. "That's code for not wanting to rock the boat. That's the luxury of privilege. Ron, you get to make movies about how wonderful humanity can be while real people are fighting for their basic rights." The audience was now completely silent. The warmth of the earlier segment evaporated. Ron's hands gripped the arms of his chair slightly tighter, the first visible sign that his legendary patience was fraying. Straightening in his seat, his voice took on a firmer edge rarely heard from the soft-spoken director. "Joy, I'm not sure what you're trying to accomplish here. You seem determined to paint me as some kind of villain for making films that bring people together. That's not privilege talking. That's experience." Joy's eyes lit up at his pushback like a predator sensing wounded prey. "Experience? You mean the experience of growing up as a white male in Hollywood? The experience of never having to fight for a seat at the table because it was handed to you on a silver platter?" Ron, still composed but clearly strained, replied, "I started working when I was 6 years old. I've been in this industry for over 50 years, and I've seen it change dramatically. I've hired more diverse crews and told more inclusive stories than most directors of my generation." "Most directors of your generation?" Joy mocked, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Do you hear yourself? You're grading yourself on a curve, Ron. You're saying you're better than other old white men. But that's not exactly setting the bar very high, is it?" Whoopi tried again to intervene, her voice carrying a note of warning. "Joy, maybe we should talk about the actual film." "No," Joy shot back without taking her eyes off Howard. "This conversation is overdue. Hollywood loves to pat itself on the back for making tiny improvements while ignoring systemic problems. Ron Howard is the poster child for that kind of thinking." Ron's knuckles whitened as he gripped his chair. "What exactly would you like me to say, Joy? That I'm sorry for having a successful career? That I should apologize for telling stories that audiences connect with? I'd like you to acknowledge reality," she fired back. "I'd like you to admit that your success came at the expense of countless talented people who never got a chance because they didn't look like you or have the connections you had." "Incredibly unfair," Ron said, his voice rising for the first time. "I've worked hard every day of my life. I've treated everyone with respect, and I've tried to use my platform to tell meaningful stories." Joy laughed, a harsh, cutting sound that filled the studio like a knife. "Worked hard? You went from child actor to successful director without ever having to prove yourself the way a woman or a person of color would have had to. You think that's hard work?" The other hosts sat frozen. Helpless witnesses, as one of Hollywood's most beloved figures was methodically dismantled on national television. Asterisk. Sarah N. looked like she wanted to crawl under the table, while Sunny Host stared down at her notes, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the interview had taken. I proved myself every single day, Ron said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Every movie I made had to succeed on its own merits. Nobody handed me anything after I turned 18 and aged out of child actor roles. Joy responded with obvious sarcasm. Right, because Hollywood is so fair and merit-based. Tell me, Ron, how many female directors did you recommend for jobs over the years? How many people of color did you mentor? I've mentored dozens of young filmmakers, Ron replied, but Joy cut him off before he could continue. How many? Give me numbers. Give me names. Because if you're going to claim you're not part of the problem, you better have some evidence to back that up. Ron stared at her for a moment, his face flushing red. I don't have to justify my entire career to you, Joy. This is supposed to be an interview about my new film, not a trial. Everything is a trial when you've benefited from an unfair system, Joy snapped. You don't get to just show up here, promote your feel-good movie, and pretend like the industry that made you rich hasn't been excluding people for decades. I never pretended anything, Ron said, his voice now clearly strained. But I also refuse to apologize for working hard and being successful. If you have a problem with the industry, take it up with the industry, with individual artists trying to tell stories. Joy leaned forward, her voice dropping to a more dangerous tone. You are the industry, Ron. You and people like you are the gatekeepers who decide what stories get told and who gets to tell them. When you make a movie about small-town America, whose small-town America are you talking about? I'm talking about universal human experiences, Ron replied. Though defensiveness crept into his tone, despite his efforts to remain composed. Asterisk universal. Joy repeated, her voice sharp. That's another code word, isn't it? Universal means whatever white people can relate to. Because if it were truly universal, it would include everybody's experience. Not just the sanitized version that makes suburban audiences feel comfortable. Ron shook his head, frustration mounting. You're twisting everything I say. I've made films about gay mathematicians, black jazz musicians, and working-class heroes. How is that sanitized or exclusive? You made films about those people for white audiences, Joy shot back. There's a difference between representation and exploitation. When you tell someone else's story, who profits? Who gets to decide how that story is told? The studio audience sat completely silent, caught between fascination and horror. As one of America's nicest celebrities was verbally eviscerated live on television. Ron Howard, who had maintained a spotless reputation for 5 decades and never been involved in a public scandal, was suddenly being painted as a symbol of everything wrong with Hollywood. Asterisk, I profit because I'm the director, Ron said. His patience finally starting to crack, but so do the actors, the crew members, and everyone else involved in making the film. That's how the business works. The business, Joy said with disgust, always comes back to business, doesn't it? Not art, not social responsibility, just business. Making money off other people's stories while patting yourself on the back for being inclusive. Ron's face was red now, his legendary composure hanging by a thread. Joy, I don't know what you want from me. Should I stop making movies? Should I give away all my money? What would satisfy you? I want honesty, Joy replied, her voice rising to match his. I want you to admit that your entire career has been built on a system that prioritizes people who look like you over everyone else. I want you to stop pretending that making feel-good movies is some kind of public service. My movies have entertained millions of people and provided jobs for thousands, Ron said, his voice shaking slightly with anger. If that's not a public service, then I don't know what is. Joy slammed her hand on the table, causing everyone to jump. Entertainment isn't enough anymore. Ron, not when people are dying. Not when democracy is under attack. Not when basic human rights are being stripped away. Your comfort food movies are part of the problem because they let people ignore what's really happening. Asterisk, the other hosts finally realized the interview had completely spiraled out of control. Whoopi tried once more to regain some semblance of order. Joy, I think we need to take a breath here. But Joy refused to relent. Her eyes locked on Ron Howard's increasingly flushed face. No. I want to hear him defend making movies that tell people everything is going to be okay when everything is clearly not okay. Suddenly, Ron stood up from his chair, a movement that drew a shocked gasp from the studio audience. His face was red, his hands trembling slightly with barely contained rage. For the first time in his 50-year career, the man known as America's Sweetheart Director had reached his breaking point. Asterisk, you know what, Joy? Ron said, his voice shaking with anger, yet still carrying that familiar cadence viewers had known since his Mayberry days. I came here to talk about a film that celebrates the best in people. And instead, I've been subjected to 20 minutes of character assassination from someone who clearly has her own agenda. Joy's eyes gleamed with satisfaction, sensing she had finally rattled the famously unflappable director. Oh, now I have an agenda. What's my agenda, Ron? She asked. Holding privileged white men accountable for their actions, she added. Your agenda, Ron replied, pointing at her, is tearing people down to make yourself feel important. You're not interested in accountability or social justice. You're interested in being the smartest person in the room, even if it means destroying someone's reputation in the process. Asterisk, the other hosts sat in stunned silence. Whoopi's mouth hung open, while Sarah N. looked like she wanted to disappear entirely. This was no longer political discourse. It had become personal warfare broadcast live to millions of viewers, destroying your reputation. Joy laughed harshly. Your reputation was built on a lie, Ron. The lie that talent alone got you where you are. That the system is fair. That if people just work hard enough, they'll succeed. You're the poster child for white mediocrity being rewarded. Ron's jaw clenched so tightly that the muscles in his face were visible. White mediocrity. I've won Academy Awards. My films have grossed billions of dollars worldwide. I've employed thousands of people and told stories that have touched millions of lives. If that's mediocrity to you, your standards are impossibly high. Asterisk, Joy shot back, standing to match his energy. Those billions came from an audience conditioned to see people like you as the default. You think that makes you special? Ron stepped toward her, fists clenched at his sides. What makes me special is that I've dedicated my entire life to this craft. I've treated everyone I've worked with respect and dignity. I've never had a scandal, never mistreated an employee, never used my position to hurt anyone. But apparently that doesn't matter to you, because I was born with the wrong skin color. Asterisk, there it is, Joy said triumphantly, clapping her hands. The white victim card. Poor Ron Howard, being held accountable for his privilege. How terrible that must be for you. This isn't about privilege, Ron exploded, his voice echoing through the studio. This is about you being a bitter, angry person who gets her kicks from tearing down successful people. You couldn't make it as a comedian, so now you make a living destroying others. The audience collectively gasped. Joy's face went white, then red, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Ron Howard, a man who had never spoken unkindly of anyone in public, had just delivered a devastating personal blow live on television. Asterisk, how dare you? Joy whispered, shaking with rage. How dare I? What? Ron replied, his voice now calm but ice cold. Tell the truth. You dish it out for a living, Joy, but apparently you can't take it. You want to talk about failed careers, let's talk about yours. You were a mediocre stand-up comic who found a new career in professional outrage. Whoopi finally found her voice. Ron, maybe we should all take a step back here. No, Whoopi, Ron said, never taking his eyes off Joy. I'm done taking steps back. I'm done being polite while people like her use their platforms to spread poison. You want to know what's wrong with America? It's not successful people telling stories. It's people like Joy, who think tearing others down is the same as building others up. Joy's hands shook now, her carefully constructed persona cracking under his unexpected counterattack. You don't know anything about me or what I've accomplished. I know you've spent the last half hour trying to destroy a man's reputation for no reason other than the fact that you disagree with his success, Ron continued. I know you've turned what should have been a pleasant conversation about art and storytelling into a vicious personal attack. And I know that millions of people watching at home just saw the real Joy Behar. It's not pretty. Sarah Haynes tried desperately to salvage the situation. Maybe we could talk about the actual film now. There's no point, Ron said, turning toward the edge of the stage. This was never about the film. This was about Joy's need to prove she's morally superior to everyone else. Well, congratulations, Joy. You've proven that you're willing to ambush a guest who came here in good faith. I hope it was worth it. Joy's voice cracked slightly as she called after him. That's right. Run away. That's what privileged people do when they're confronted with reality. Ron stopped dead in his tracks, slowly turning around to face her one final time. The studio was so quiet, you could hear the cameras worry as they captured every moment of this unprecedented breakdown. Reality, Ron said, his voice dangerously quiet. The reality is that I've spent 50 years earning respect in this industry through hard work and treating people well. The reality is that you've spent your career surviving by being cruel and calling it honesty. The reality is that after today, everyone will know which one of us is the real problem. Get out, Joy screamed, pointing toward the exit. Just get out. I was already leaving, Ron replied calmly, adjusting his jacket with as much dignity as he could muster. Good luck explaining this to your producers.